Now let's talk with Melissa Rogers. Melissa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Very impassioned message for us about religious freedom. And you bring an interesting perspective to this, I think, as an attorney by training, a lot of work in the civic landscape around this. I want to start by asking, what's the big disconnect for people around religious freedom? What I mean by that, you ask a lot of people, do you believe in the separation of church and state? And most people answer yes. But then you get in a real conversation with folks and the lines blur like crazy. So kick us off here as best you can.
Right. I think people can readily identify with the idea of religious freedom for everyone. Okay. But sometimes when those principles of high generality and nobility have to be applied in particular situation, we begin to feel a rub. And we begin to feel perhaps fearful of the unknown, fearful of unfamiliar religions and what those religions might mean. So I think Americans do struggle with this, but I'm also heartened by our history in that if enough of us are active in this fight, we continue to expand the circle of inclusion and come closer to making the principles that we espouse actual reality in our American lives together.
Okay. Well, so it seems that it's not just some religions that people are fearful of, but there's an increasing sense that religion is a negative, that it's a source of conflict. And you saw this in the memorial around the 10th anniversary of September 11th, right, when the religious community was not included in the memorial service. What did you make of that?
Well, I did notice that there were some religious readings in that ceremony and moments of silence which were inclusive and people of many different faiths, of course, to pray, or for those who don't practice a faith to just reflect on the moment. So you did see a flashpoint around that, but I think that religion was present in some important ways, but sometimes it's not always presented in a way that might be as familiar to us at other times.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other interesting things you said in your message was about feeling for minorities. And I was talking to Lillian before this program, and I said, I used to work with an organization called Catholic Extension Society, whose mission was to serve the mission dioceses around the country. So an interesting example of this was we did work in Salt Lake City, Utah. And if you're a Catholic in Salt Lake City, you are a minority. Right. And it was fascinating to hear that story. So do you want to expand on that at all? Because we think of denominations, large denominations, being a Catholic, that I happen to be, as a majority religion, but that's not necessarily the case across the country geographically.
That's an excellent point. And you can be in various parts of our country and be a minority, even though most of the times in other parts of the country you would be a majority. So I think it's instructive for us, that experience, and it also reminds us that the precedents that we create, if they are abusive to minorities, they will be abusive to people of our own faith. It will just be in another part of the country. So hopefully that is a good check on a potential abuse that might happen of the majority by the minority. And of course, that's just in our own country. When we think about countries, for example, Muslim majority countries abroad, when we do a good job here of protecting Muslim Americans' free exercise rights, who are in many cases a minority faith in our own country, we strengthen our case, for example, of protecting Christian missionaries in Muslim majority countries by saying to them, look, practice the golden rule here. We're doing right by Muslim people in our own society who are the minority, and we can lead by example by saying, and now we ask you to do the right thing by others who are not Muslim in your own country.
So you have a fascinating job. You have a legal background, you're trained in that, and yet you work at a Baptist university in a Baptist divinity school. Tell us why the Baptists care so much about this issue.
Right, yes, I was born and raised in a Baptist home and remain a Baptist. And so Baptists ourselves, we have the historical memory of being a persecuted minority in this country. In the early days of our country, Baptists were often despised, and we were regulated by the government sometimes in various states and punished for preaching and doing other things that people considered strange and unfamiliar. And so that memory of that time makes us particularly responsible for carrying that message forward for others who are minorities of particular faiths in our country today.
But if I may follow up, I mean,
sure.
Some of us have heard Baptist preachers call on us to be a Christian nation, for example. Where do they fit into this?
Well, you know, there are a lot of different kinds of Baptists in the United States of America, and I think that the historic Baptist would be very careful to stress the nation's commitment to religious freedom for everyone. Of course, we Christians are very proud of our faith and our heritage and the contributions that we have made to this society, but one of those great contributions, I think, is to contribute to the establishment of the principle of religious freedom for everyone. And so it's particularly incumbent on us as a more majority faith these days to respect those who are in the minority and recognize that is one of the genius contributions of America to statecraft, this principle of religious freedom for all, that we can truly lead and be an exceptional nation by staying true to that principle in times when it's difficult as well as in times when it's easy.
We've got a little less than 2 minutes left, Melissa, but I want to ask you while you're here with us, as an expert that deals in policy in Washington, D.C. quite a lot, we look at how the conversation is politicized, right? What words of wisdom can you give us as we see these things on television unfold around an election cycle? It's so easy to become cynical around this, right? I mean, candidates don't want to talk about their personal religion, but when they have a stump speech, they insert their personal religion. So about a minute left. Give us some wisdom here that we can, and our audience can take from this as someone on the front lines with us.
Right. I think we cannot have a situation where candidates say, now you see it and now you don't. There has to be some kind of consistency here. So I think when a candidate does choose to talk about how their faith informs or would inform their governance, then that's a legitimate area for us to discuss, not in a way that makes it sound strange or anything like that, but simply to say, now you have said that your religious beliefs on these issues would influence your government. Unpack that a little bit more for us and help us to understand that, because that's something that's obviously relevant for all of us. I think it'll also help if our journalists become more well-versed in these matters so that they ask the questions that are relevant to governance, not the questions that do not have relevance to governance.
Thank you for that.